Hello, everyone. Welcome to another community conversation hosted by your girl, HannahJoyTV. As you all know, we host different conversations focusing on different topics. And with everything going on with protesting efforts underway and lots of people just, of course, fighting for justice in the wake of so many different situations, we are joined by one of our brothers in the fight, Attorney Griggs, who is an activist, an advocate, and of course, an attorney, also known as a justice fighter who does incredible work in Atlanta and of course around the country. And so we are joined by Attorney Griggs today. Welcome, Attorney Griggs.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for being here. And, we've got people tuning in. Also, if you are joining us and you're tuning in, let us know where you're tuning in from, or drop your comments below. We will be able to see them here. And I can also pull up your questions during this conversation. So we hope this is both informative and inspiring as we continue to chat. So Attorney Griggs, let's start with this week. You just got back from Louisville, Kentucky. Tell us about that experience, you going out there to advocate for, of course, justice for Breonna Taylor and all of our brothers and sisters. What was that like?
Yeah, so Until Freedom had BreonnaCon this past week. It actually started last Friday and went all the way to yesterday. And it was a 4 or 5 day convention focused on getting justice for Breonna Taylor. So they had the BBQ, they had Praise in the Park, and then they had the Day of Action. They had a food drive and food giveaway, and then a couple community concerts to commemorate the life of Breonna Taylor with the blessing of her family. Mm-hmm. And so we were there for most of the convention. We got a activist training. We got an intergenerational conversation with some of the older activists in Louisville, Kentucky. And then on what's today? Thursday. On Tuesday, we had the Day of Action that many people saw in those viral images of the bridge occupation and then the arrest of the Louisville 64. So we've been doing a lot on the ground. I got a different perspective. This is the second time I've been to Louisville for protesting, and I must say the energy is just different. They're very engaged. They're very focused on getting justice for Breonna Taylor. They are trying to hold the Mayor Fisher, accountable, as well as the Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, to get justice and arrest the 3 police officers that killed Breonna Taylor.
Absolutely, because that all needs to be done, and that needs to be done immediately. And when you went there, you also shared how you were able to take away some different things. You learned, some different things. And I know you've been in the game for quite some time. What are some of those tactics or sort of information that you picked up on while you were out there?
Yeah, I mean, to think about how the local activists on the ground have made this an international case, I wanted to get more insight. And they just said that they were focused. They were focused. They took over Freedom Park, which is now Brianna Square. It's a memorial to Brianna. Many people have seen it. It's like a little fountain area with the picture, and I mean all the memorabilia there and the tributes to her life. They are always at the Department of Corrections facility because they're always getting arrested, and they're getting arrested for civil disobedience. So they're just at a different level. They said they're not going home until there's justice, and they've been out there for 5 months. So I just think that the level of engagement in Louisville is different because they're simply tired and they're focused, and they're not going to be dissuaded. They've been to Daniel Cameron's house a couple of times. They are always, in the square. They're always marching. They're impromptu marches. They have let the LMPD know that they're not going anywhere until there's justice. And so I just learned a lot about how to stay fully engaged, how to keep the narrative going that's necessary to get justice in cases like this. So I'm thankful to No Justice, No Peace Coalition and many of the other organizations on the ground doing the work day in and day out. So it was an awesome experience.
I think that consistency is very telling, and it is very inspiring because there is still no justice. People are still fighting for justice. We need to understand that this fight is far from over, and it's going to take continued efforts, sustained protesting, and things like that. What do you say to people who turn a blind eye to protesting and say, why are y'all still protesting? What does this actually solve? Because I got a message like that even this week. I was getting messages like that in May and June, but to get it again this week about just, you know, and I just would love for you to share why folks continue to protest and the importance of it and how it makes a difference.
Well, we protest because it's in our DNA. We protest because there is not any justice. That's why I like the name of the new organization by Tamika Mallory, Until Freedom. We're going to protest until there's freedom. So I think to the people that are the naysayers, I mean, you can look at the track record of success of the old movement and the new movement. I mean, people wouldn't have known Breonna Taylor's name but for the consistency of the local activists that galvanized national activists and that galvanized an international movement for justice for Brianna. So, you know, her family is deeply involved. Her mother was there. Many of the mothers of the movement were there. Trayvon Martin's mother was there. Ahmaud Arbery's mother was there. So we do it for the passion of these families and for justice. And for the naysayers, many of them have never been to a protest. A protest is basically a teach-in, it's a love-in, it's a focused activity to voice displeasure with what's happening, whether that's law enforcement or whether that's injustice in the system. So, you know, we never get tired. And the thing is, people keep saying, well, when is the injustice going to end? It's not going to end until we make sure that we hold up the symbols of justice that we want. And in Louisville, they're real clear on what their demands are. You know, they have been successful. They got Breonna's law passed in the city of Louisville, and now they're working on state legislation. They've forced Daniel Cameron to make public statements about the case that he didn't want to make. And he actually made it on big platforms because people are focused on holding him accountable. So, you know, even though it's been 5 months and there have been no charges, they got one officer fired. They're holding the other two accountable. They're holding the Attorney General accountable. Now they're opening a Department of Justice investigation, and you're seeing this passion spill out to other cities. I mean, you got to think about Louisville's not that far from Kenosha, Wisconsin. It's not that far from St. Louis. So you had activists coming from Chicago, activists coming from St. Louis, activists coming from Cincinnati, Indianapolis. And so when you're in the Midwest like that, you really understand that it's a lot closer knit than the South because it's not as spread out. And that message is resonating, that they are focused and they will stay in the streets. I saw, you know, young children in the streets. I saw allies of different complexions in the streets. You know, I just saw a different level of engagement. And again, we have to remember, this was a Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. There was 1,000 people in the street, you know, saying they weren't going home. And Louisville's a different type of heat. It's super hot. And so, I mean, it just reinvigorated me to stay in the fight and to remind people, you know, that the Montgomery bus boycott lasted 382 days. So the fact that people are out for 5 straight months, we're still warming up.
Absolutely. This is still warming up, and we will continue to. And you made a lot of great points about, you know, the impacts of it. And I got to agree, if you've never been out to a protest, maybe you need to get out to one to really be out there and experience it. And it's also an opportunity to mobilize your community, to bring people together, to strategize, and to really push forward. And so when we think about, you know, moving forward, because sometimes it's so hard to, it's not hard, but it can be, it's a lot going on. It's like as soon as you're talking about moving forward from one thing, another thing happens, and then another thing happens. And so we're hearing a lot of, you know, well, what can we do beyond approaching this case by case? Because this continues to happen. We're continuing to see brothers and sisters getting killed, murdered in broad daylight by police, by violence, by brutality. And so what do you say in terms of how we can go beyond taking these steps to do individual cases, but maybe from a federal level or like a, you know, or a nationwide level? Like, how do we go about approaching it in that way?
We got to continue to put pressure on the federal government, the Department of Justice, with William Barr. He needs to take this seriously. This is a national epidemic of police violence against ordinary citizens, particularly citizens of color, Black citizens. And so we need to raise it to the level that it's a 5-alarm fire in all media, not just social media, not just mainstream media, but all media. And so that's why I love the fact that for the people who say this is not making an impact, I think yesterday we learned it made an impact when LeBron James and Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks and the Los Angeles Lakers said we're not playing. And so they shut down the playoffs. I mean, if you don't think that's not like a Rosa Parks moment or a Jackie Robinson moment or a Muhammad Ali moment, I don't know where you're living. You're living under a rock. Mm-hmm. And so for the NBA to shut down, and then for many Major League Baseball teams to say we're not playing, the WNBA to say we're not playing, Major League Soccer teams to say we're not playing. If you shut down major sports, that's affecting their money. And now we have an economic disturbance. You know, people forget that the civil rights movement not only had protests, but they had economic disturbance. And once you start to affect that economic incentive, then you have real leverage and real power. When we start saying there's not going to be any games until there's justice, you're going to see justice come. And the national conversation has already sparked back up. I mean, you got people, you know, on one side saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe that the king of basketball said he's not playing. Well, he's affected in a different way because he's a black man who's raising black sons, who's been affected by the viral images of violence against black bodies. So, you know, people keep saying, well, they're protesting for Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Yes, they are protesting for Jacob Blake, but it's a culmination of anger that goes back 401 years. So whether you jumped into this protest from Emmett Till or Trayvon Martin or Rodney King or Ahmaud Arbery or now Jacob Blake, you've joined a long list of activists who just got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so I just think that it's just continued to build and that people are focused and that we will get justice.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a very important point. This has been happening for centuries. This has been happening for a long time. Jacob Blake's sister even spoke out this week and was saying how this has been happening to her family. She called Emmett Till her family. She called Philando Castile her family, Sandra Bland her family, because this has been happening to Black people for ages, for centuries, and it's time to change. And I know one topic that really comes up when we talk about the national conversation is abolishing qualified immunity. Yeah. And I know you do a great deal of talking about that as well as educating folks about that. Can you just educate us about that and also what we can do to really make that become a reality?
Yeah. So you see the blue books above my head, that's civil rights practice manuals. And so you see there's multiple volumes. But the reason why a lot of these families can't get justice is qualified immunity. And qualified immunity is the protections that law enforcement officers and members of the government get because of their status as public servants. And so they're given certain leeway. That way you cannot sue them. So you can file a lawsuit and you go to what's called motion for summary judgment, and the case is dismissed because you did not breach the sovereign immunity doctrine. And so we have to revisit that. We can revisit it one of two ways. We can revisit it with a Supreme Court case that destroys qualified immunity because it came into being through legislation and litigation, but mainly Supreme Court doctrine. Or you can legislate it away by having the Congress pass a law that does away with qualified immunity. That's why it's important to raise awareness because, you know, Dr. King always said there are three ways to get change. Agitation, that's protest, legislation, that's getting laws passed, or litigation, that's suing individuals and going all the way up to the Supreme Court. So we won't really get justice until we do away with qualified immunities. That's why it's important for lawyers and other professionals to be on the front lines. People say there are inequities in the system. Well, we have to name those inequities. And one of them is the doctrine of qualified immunity or sovereign immunity, meaning that you cannot sue the sovereign. So we can say all day long, oh, we need lawyers to sue. But if you can't get past qualified immunity, you really can't sue. So that's why we are raising the level of knowledge in this particular field so that people can understand the impediments that are there and how we remove them. So if people want to get sovereign immunity taken off of the books, you need to contact your Congress people, you need to contact your senators, you need to contact your local elected officials, meaning your state senators and your state representatives, because not only is it federal law, but it's codified in state law. And so we can remove that legislation, or we can file lawsuits to go all the way up to invalidate the doctrine. Because just like in the civil rights movement, the Montgomery bus boycott ended because of a lawsuit that they were successful in the Supreme Court. So it's a coordination of action that needs to happen, and we need all hands on deck.
So you're saying that as individuals in whatever state everybody's tuning in from, we should be emailing our congressmen, our local reps, congresswomen, saying
we want
immunity. To end qualified immunity. And this is not something that a state can interfere with on its own. It can't have like its own, mandate.
Federalism means certain powers are reserved for the federal government, certain powers are reserved for the state. So you have certain elements of federalism in this. There's federal qualified immunity, and then there's state qualified immunity. If you're suing in a state court, it will be state level qualified immunity. But many of these cases are 1983 claims, meaning they're federal lawsuits. So you have to get the federal removal of federal qualified immunity. So it's twofold, depending on where you filed a lawsuit for the violation of your constitutional rights or your state rights, because both the federal government has a constitution and the state government has a constitution. The federal government's constitution is the floor of rights. States can build on top of that floor and give more rights. So that's why it's important to understand the distinction between state law and federal law. But the short answer to your question is you need to call your elected officials on all levels and tell them to remove qualified immunity so these families can get justice.
And this is something we should be looking out for when they're running for office, right? We should be asking these questions while they're running, not just waiting till they get into their seats. So I think that's something that, as when we talk about protesting, these are the conversations you have. These are the conversations you learn about while you're out there, because you learn about action steps that you can take from the streets to the halls of Congress and so on. And so thank you for explaining that as well. And I just kind of want to ask you, there's this saying, of course, that NAACP has kicked off this year, or not this year, but maybe in recent years, of "We Are Done Dying." And that hashtag has really, really just, you've seen it transpire throughout social media, because we are tired. We really are done dying. So what does that mean to you? And why do you continue to push the way you do?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I joined the NAACP is because I looked up to legendary lawyers like Thurgood Marshall. And Thurgood would fight in the courtroom, but he would also be an advocate and an ally and an activist. And so, right after Ahmaud Arbery's case, the NAACP kicked off a new campaign called "We're Done Dying." It's a hashtag. And the campaign is quite simply the association's getting back to the business it's always been about, and that's protecting people's rights against unlawful lynchings. And so we wanted to reassert our position that we're done dying. That means that we're going to hold accountable anybody that believes that it's okay to have extrajudicial killings of African Americans. So whether that's the Travis and Gregory McMichael down in Brunswick, Georgia, or that's the police officers in Louisville, Kentucky, or Kenosha, Wisconsin, we're done. So we're not going to take the excuses of the past. If you commit atrocities against Black people, the NAACP will be on the front lines holding you accountable. You've seen that in Brunswick. You've seen that here in Atlanta with Rayshard Brooks's case. You're seeing that in Louisville, Kentucky, and in Minneapolis with George Floyd. Many of the organizations that are on the ground either have members that are in the NAACP, or the NAACP is leading the fight directly. So the campaign is kicked off. You can go to the hashtag and you can see all of the different cases that we're taking on, all the lawyers that we're partnering with, all of the activist groups, whether they're legacy groups or they're grassroots orgs that we're partnering with. And I think Saturday we will be at the march. I think the NAACP is having a virtual march because of COVID-19, but we will be at the march on Washington that was called by Reverend Sharpton. And so we are focused. We're doing what the NAACP has done for, since 1909. Every great movement the NAACP has been a part of or helped to organize or help to provide leaders for. So I think that it's incumbent in this space, in this time, in this movement, that the NAACP be a part of it. So we're done.
It's really important, and we absolutely are done dying. And as we continue to move forward, I know you shared a couple of ways earlier that people can continue to, stay in this fight, because we've got to stay in this. We cannot stop. We can't turn it off. We can't pretend like things are normal, because they never have been normal for us. We're still pursuing the journey to freedom. And so in addition to some of the points you mentioned, like, doing your homework on qualified immunity and contacting your state reps and congressmen and women to fight against that, what are other additional action steps that you would encourage anybody watching this to take during this time to continue fighting for justice?
Yeah. So, I think we're in a peculiar time because of the pandemic and life kind of stopping, that people can take a moment and reflect and study. If you're going to be an activist, you need to study those that came before you, so you can best engage in this time. So I would suggest people read Fred Gray's book, Bus Ride to Freedom, so you get a full understanding of what happened in Montgomery. You can read Benjamin Lafayette's book about the Selma movement and what happened in Selma. You can read, of course, Representative Lewis's book, Into the Wind, I think that's the name of it, that talks about what he knows. Of course, my dear brother and mentor, Representative Lewis, and Representative CT Vivian, read their books. But go on YouTube and Amazon and start watching the documentaries. You can watch the documentary on the Greensboro Four to talk about the sit-in movement in the 60s. You can watch documentaries on Stokely Carmichael to talk about the Black Power movement, Huey P. Newton and the Black Panthers, Sada Secure, and learn more about that movement, so you can combine all of the teachings. Of course, Malcolm X, I was actually on the bus listening to on YouTube the autobiography of Malcolm X. It brought out some very inspirational things that Malcolm believed in, and you can start using those in your own movement education, because you need to know that the movement is bigger than just you in this time frame. Marcus Garvey and Sojourner Truth, and of course W.E.B. Du Bois, who started the NAACP, and understand that there are different philosophies and movement, but we're all in the same movement, and that's for the empowerment of our people.
Amen to that. Amen to that. That's another way, absolutely, we can continue fighting. I think sometimes we underestimate the power of educating ourselves, right? And then we also can talk about social media, right? Social media is a great tool to inform, to educate, to raise awareness, and also fight for justice. And I want to show a comment here that says justice for Jimmy Atchison. And we've heard his story. Absolutely. Justice for Jimmy Atchison. We're sending our love to his family and continuing to lift that community up in prayer. But I know you've been doing a powerful job advocating and fighting for justice for Jimmy Atchison. If you could take a couple minutes to share that story, and also how people can get involved in that particular fight.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go to Louisville and find out on the ground how they amplified Breonna Taylor's case, so we can bring it back and amplify the Georgia cases, especially Jimmy Atchison's case, because that case touched me to my soul, because as a native of Southwest Atlanta, Jimmy was a son of Southwest Atlanta. He was killed January the 22nd, 2019 by a federal task force that was serving an arrest warrant in Allen Hills, which is the old Allen Temple Apartments. And so Jimmy was at his girlfriend's house when the federal task force tried to execute an arrest warrant. He ran from the federal task force and hid in the Candy Lady's house and was summarily executed with one shot to his face by Officer Sung Kim of the Atlanta Police Department. And this was like a week before the Super Bowl. And so from that point, I was contacted by the family's attorney and the family to help them to get justice for Jimmy. We've been all around the city, all around the state, amplifying his case. It was featured in BET Cop Watch. It's been featured in national media. We're still demanding change. Because of Jimmy Atchison's case, the federal task force is now mandated to wear body-worn cameras. Before they didn't. And the city of Atlanta divested or pulled its officers off of the federal task force because of the lack of transparency. So for the people that say we're not getting justice, we are getting justice. Now, ultimately, we want Sun Kim held accountable for the unlawful killing of Jimmy Atchison, but we also want not another family to have to go through this pain. So that's just one of the cases here in Atlanta. Of course, you have Jamarian Robinson was shot 76 times. His mother, Montori Robinson, has been fighting for justice for 4 years. I was able to go through that crime scene. I've been to a lot of crime scenes, and these things are horrific. Oscar Kane, who was an activist, was killed by Atlanta police. Jamarian Robinson, Beltavius Griggs, Deatrick Griffin, DeAndre Phillips, and these are just some of the names. Anthony Hill, just in Atlanta, Nicholas Thomas, that we have advocated for justice and still demanding justice on these regional cases in hopes to make them national cases so that the world understands that Georgia has a police brutality problem and Atlanta has a police brutality problem. I mean, there are 46 cases in Atlanta, 18 open cases. And so when somebody says Atlanta doesn't have this problem, that's not true. Rayshard Brooks was just the camel. I mean, it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. But there is a long history going all the way back to Katherine Johnston of continued police brutality cases in the city of Atlanta, in the state of Georgia.
Just so much to take in there. You know, it just, I first of all just don't even know what part to respond to. But the part of you saying, you know, there is some progress, right? Because now there's certain instances where they're required to wear these body cameras, or, you know, they're doing away with certain task forces or this and that. And it's taking steps forward, you know, little steps, little by little. In my head, it's just like, why did it take so many people losing their lives to even get to a point where you finally take that step? You know, it's just like, why does it take brothers and sisters dying for you to finally take the action that you need to take? And it's good to see that there is progress, but like you said, we want to see officers charged. We want to see officers prosecuted. We want to see officers convicted, because these families don't get to see their loved ones again, and their lives will never go back to normal. And so police need to be held accountable for those wrongdoings. And until police start being held accountable, this behavior is really going to continue. We're going to see this because there's absolutely no accountability. Just to show you some of the other comments that are showing during this time. Jimmy Hill said, we must continue to fight and not allow no one to silence nor discredit our voices. Thank you for that. Abdul Nasir Shah says, we need to stick together. The only way to fight injustice. That's right. Jonas Wildu said, good work, Gerald Griggs. And then, of course, there is a lot of other comments here as well. Thank you all for contributing and sharing your thoughts and your comments as well. And so I guess just like I want to ask you as we, you know, wrap up, because I feel like we could be here all day talking about so many different things. But you brought up a good point. You know, this is happening in our home state, Georgia. It's happening all over the country. And it's important every single time it happens, because we don't want to see any more people dying. We don't. But, you know, here in Georgia, it's a lot going on. It's a lot going on in Atlanta. And so we have to do our part. And I know you are out on the front lines. You're out, you know, doing interviews all throughout the day. You're also working full time as an attorney with your own office. So, and a family man, you know, you're everywhere. So I'd like to just hear, you know, because we all could use some encouragement right now, right, as we push forward. So how do you stay encouraged during these times to continue fighting? And what would you like to share to anyone that's watching right now?
I just remember the words of my mentors. I remember the words of Representative John Lewis and the words of C.T. Vivian and Reverend Joseph Lowry and so many others, that it's just time. You know, it's time to get in some good trouble. It's time to make sure that the line of liberation continues until we get to liberation. It's time to get to the promised land that Dr. King talked about. He said he'd been to the mountaintop and he looked over and he seen the promised land, but he didn't get there. And so we have to get there and not give a world worse off to our children than the one we received. I know a lot of people out here are talking about, oh man, it's not getting any better. You know, why are we still fighting? The fact that we as African Americans who have been in this country for 401 years have the rights that we have right now is because of our ancestors. The ones who refuse to be chattel slaves, the ones that refuse Jim Crow, the ones that refuse segregation, the ones that refuse mass incarceration, those are our ancestors. And so it's on us. So, I mean, I'm not the type that's going to sit and tell my daughter, oh, yeah, I was just disheartened, so I just sat on the internet and made comments all day. That's not how this thing works. I've looked into the eyes of militarized police. I've now been on 2 bridges where they had batons and assault rifles and all. It felt like the 60s all over again.
And this is this week. You're literally referring to Kentucky this week.
This is Denny Crump Way. We're on Denny Crump Way with 2 lines of militarized police with AK-47s ready to go and them big brown billy clubs. And I sat there and thought to myself, man, John Lewis has some real courage. And so, my hope is that just like he made a change, we can make a change. And he was so happy in his final days to see the young people so engaged and getting in good trouble. He left us a message. And that message is we need to get in some good trouble, good and necessary trouble. Reverend Dr. Vivian, he was always elated to see us. He was so happy. You could see his eyes light up. These are men who were on the front line, who stared down Big Sheriff Jim Clark and Bull Connor when they released the dogs and they turned the water hoses on people and they got beaten at lunch counters. And they were happy to see what we're doing. So it's only normal for us to do the exact same things because we are our ancestors' children. So for the people that have a lot to say on the internet, I'm sorry, I don't really listen to you because I'm on the front line. When I come to the internet, it's to give you the information about what's happening on the front line. But if you're not on the front line, I really don't care what you have to say because, Jacob could have been dead. Ahmaud is gone. Every time I look at that video, I get traumatized. You know what I'm saying? So I had to turn that trauma into power and that pain into action. And so if you're just on the internet talking, one day your child or your grandchild is going to pull up your comments on the internet because it's not like the 60s where you pretend and say, oh, yo, I marched with Dr. King. No, because they got pictures now. They got video. So if you didn't march with Tamika or you didn't march with Linda or you didn't march with me or you didn't march in any of this stuff, you don't have anything to say. And now we have modern day Muhammad Ali's. You got 2 of them, LeBron, Colin. So if you thought what was impactful, what happened yesterday, that was awesome. But that wasn't the first athlete to stand up or better yet, take a knee. And so some of us been boycotting NFL for 4 years. And when we told you back then, there wasn't going to be any sports until we got justice. Well, how many more have to die before you join the battle? Because they're not going to change until we make them change. Our foreparents had to make them change. We're not free because all of a sudden they got a conscience and said, oh, we're going to free you guys. No, we had to fight for that freedom. And so we have to continually fight for the freedom because they're trying to go back. But I promise you this, it's not 1850 and it's not 1950. And so the spirit of our ancestors should compel us to fight back in the way we know how. I am a proponent of the Kingian nonviolent social resistance because it works. And so I'm just asking you, as humbly as I know how, to join us on the front line so you can be part of that victory. It felt good yesterday to see grown Black men stand in their power and say, no, we're not doing that. And so if you felt that type of courage, that should be the motivation you need to say, you know what? When I see something that's wrong, when I see something that's not right, it is my obligation to stand up and get in the way, to get in some good trouble, good and necessary trouble. That's what John Lewis said. And John Lewis would have been proud of LeBron James yesterday. He would have been proud of Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks yesterday. And so I have a message for a few of the other sports teams out there, namely the Atlanta Braves. You are in Atlanta. You should have been just like the Atlanta United and just like the Dream. You had some legends of the civil rights movement play for your team. What would Hank Aaron do in this moment when they were throwing black cats on the field and calling them all kinds of stuff? But he kept hitting homers, and he kept until he broke Babe Ruth's record, and he is the home run king, period. You know, and so when we start understanding what our foreparents really stood for, and we stand in that moment, especially in Atlanta, because at the last Olympic Games, we had a hero light the torch. His name was Muhammad Ali. What did he stand for? So we can't sit here and give accolades to them, but we scared to live in our moment. So my message is this point, is this. This is our moment. This is our Edmund Pettus Bridge. This is our Montgomery moment. This is our, what are we going to do when Harriet Tubman comes as Black Moses and says it's time to go? Are you going to stay in the fields? Or are you going to stand up and be a man and a woman and say, today we get our liberation? Me and my house, we're going to get that liberation. So y'all see me on the front lines.
Yes. Yes. And we're going to run to that liberation too. There's no walking. We are running. We are powerful. We are continuing to run in that. We just want to say thank you so much. And, you know, you're on the front lines with litigation, agitation, and legislation, all three of those areas. And anyone watching this, we challenge you to be on the front lines in at least one of those areas, and if not all three. So if everyone can join me in clapping it up for Attorney Gerald Griggs. Thank you so much. Thank you, brother.
I want to leave everybody with this.
Yes, please.
There are many positions in revolution. Everybody doesn't have to be a freedom fighter on the front lines. You could be a freedom fighter in your job, making sure you are protecting people's rights and calling out something that's wrong, whether that's going to HR, whether that's saying something at your PTA meeting, whether that's educating your children to be the best students they possibly can so they can be the next lawyer, doctor, or the best whatever. Because, you know, Dr. King said, if you're going to be a janitor, be the best janitor, you know. But we have to understand that we are in a high tide. We're in a pivotal moment in history right now. We're in the middle of a new movement. And the question is this: are we going to go forward or are we going to go backward? 50 years from now, you're going to remember where you were in 2020. This has been the type of year where anything could possibly happen. And so you have to ask yourself this one simple question. If this is my last day on this planet, have I left my mark? Have I made this place better for the people that are going to come after me? If that answer is no, then you need to get into this movement. If that answer is yes, then you know, get 5 more people and get them into this movement. And let's get our liberation. Let's make sure they understand that we aren't going back, and we're going to protect our brothers and sisters, regardless of their race, regardless of their creed, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their documented or undocumented status, because this country, the United States of America, was built by people that came on came on different ships, but we all in the same boat now. And my humble request is for our white brothers and sisters to go have a conversation with your racist family members and tell them this: the brown and black folks are tired of this, and we're not going to take any more of your oppression, period.
Period. And we are starting to see more of that. And I know we will continue to see more of that. I don't know about you guys that are all tuning in, but I feel a little bit more uplifted myself after talking to Attorney Griggs tonight. Just so much realness, so much truth. And to his point, you know, let's all make that difference. Go tell 2 friends, 5 friends, 10 friends, how many ever friends you can, and find your role in this revolution. Just to show some of the comments, a bunch of people saluting your words. Thank you, Kim Bowden. Thank you, Hannah Kabedi. Thank you, Abdul Nasir Shash. And few different people. Mackenzie Mercado, just want to shout her out. She was just arrested actually in Louisville. She was part of that Louisville.
Mackenzie is a part of the Louisville, either 64 or 68. I don't know the accurate number, but Mackenzie is a frontline soldier. My hat is off to Mackenzie.
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for your sacrifice and going out there. And we appreciate you, sister, and we appreciate you being in this fight together, all of us together. Ainalam Tilahun says amazing. Jonas Wodu, of course. Thank y'all for tuning in. And then just a few other people as well. Rise. You got a Black Power in here from RG Legends. Yes, we are going to continue pushing everybody, continue fighting. And I want to encourage everyone to please follow Attorney Griggs on social media, his Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Attorney Griggs. He's constantly posting updates, more ways you can get involved. Not to mention, we always talking about voting early and filling out the census. So don't forget to do those 2 things while we're at it. But yeah, thank you so much, Attorney Griggs. We appreciate you. We thank you and we salute you. Continue to keep up the great work. And you know, as always, no justice.
No peace.
No peace. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.